Hey guys, this is GWS here, and yep, it is time for more secular bullshit. Alright, so much economic ignorance. Like I said, I normally wouldn't respond to this, but it's too bad. This is off the rails freaking horrible, and you hear it from them all the time, and I have to respond to it. A lot of my viewers are idiotic secular talk fans, so here's to you. So let's hear what Kyle has to say about economics.
He's got this stupid executive order he signed. For every one new regulation we add on the books, we have to eliminate two. So he's crafting policy as if it's like a fucking order from Papa John's Pizza. If you order two, you get one free. Do you understand? That's not exactly analogous, but I think you get the point. It's like a fucking right-wing talking point. It's like...
Okay, now, first of all, how is that exactly a bad thing? Because what is Papa John's? Papa John's is a business. And therefore, Trump is running this country like a business, as he was elected to do. So, let's move on.
Herman Cain from back in the day. My plan 999. The fuck is that? It's not how you govern a country. Are you really... Like, that's your brilliant idea? Yeah. Herman Cain from back in the day. My plan 999. The fuck is
and just
that?
listen to his lack of nuance. Now, a lot of you guys are under this impression that Kyle is this smart guy. And what's this whole argument? Oh, right-wing talking point. Oh, Herman Cain. Yeah. Where's the argument? Where is the economic literature? Where is the economic theory? And let me just remind you guys who watch this show, like Kyle used to do intellectual theory. Maybe not in economics, but he did it especially on religion. You go look back at his past videos. Like, I'm talking years back. Kyle's been far gone for 2.5, 3 years. I didn't make videos on him because I at least respected his content a little bit. He was trying to be nuanced about the issues. He still wasn't very smart back then, but he was at least curious. Now it's just there's nothing there. Where's the argument? Anyhow, let's move on.
The other aspects of Trump's economic plan, cutting taxes for the rich. Yeah, we've never done that before. Again, 19 teens, 1920s, cut taxes for the rich and deregulate. Under George W. Bush, cut taxes. The other aspects of Trump's economic plan, cutting taxes for the rich. Yeah, we've never done that before. Again, 19 teens, 1920s, cut taxes for the rich and deregulate. Under George W. Bush, cut taxes for the rich, deregulate. What happens? A boom-bust economic cycle, because that is always what happens.
Why don't you call it by its actual name? Laissez-faire economics.
Supply-side economics.
What does that mean? That means you give economic freedom to people and businesses. It is not supply-side economics. Supply-side economics is where you subsidize the private sector in order to encourage growth. It is the reverse of demand-side economics, where you provide welfare to the masses. No, laissez-faire economics is where you do neither of those things. Where you let the free market go, and therefore supply and demand balance each other out, because the private sector is going to produce what people demand, and of course you are going to get excess. Why are you going to get excess? Because it is safer to be slightly on the side of supply than on the side of demand. See, here's the thing. Here's what liberals would have you believe. Like, demand-side economics. What's demand-side economics? Well, let me give you an example. And I know you guys hate this, but it's coming. Venezuela. You got people, you talk about demand-side economics, people demand food, toilet paper, medical supplies. South Africa, same thing. It's like, there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand there. Does the demand magically create the supply? No. So it's like this whole idea that, the dichotomy of supply side versus demand side economics, It only works if you say that laissez-faire is supply side. It's not. So here's the deal with it. And another thing too is boom bust economic cycle. And I don't think Kyle's fans are even smart enough to understand this, but if you let the economy run its course, who does that boom bust economic cycle hurt? Does it hurt the poor in the very short term? But while it may hurt the poor, it absolutely kills the rich, because here's what happens. And you guys want to talk about separating rich people from their money and having a merit-based system? You guys understand what a speculation market is? It's a trap. A speculation market is a trap for rich people who are not smart with money. Oh, this housing boom. Well, $450,000 a house, that's never going to go down. Here, let me throw a few billion into that. And oh shit, the economy will crash. I'm out of money. Like, that's how it is. It's the boom bust cycle is, think of it as recycling. You are recycling the children of entrepreneurs who are too stupid to manage their own money properly, who put all their eggs in this basket thinking they're going to get this unlimited wealth from a speculation market. Bubble bursts, they lose their money. That's what happens. But the way it happened, it wasn't the boom bust economic cycle that was the problem. What was the problem was the government bailed out. And this is where I can level with you guys. Those banks should have never been bailed out. You have to let them fail. You cannot have too big to fail. Otherwise, you don't have a real capitalism. Those banks are essentially just a front for the government. And then you look at multiple other levels, like you have Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which is where much of the crash happened. That's who ended up with all the assets. What were those created by? Were those created by entrepreneurs? No, those are government-created banks. Fannie Mae was created by FDR as a government lender, and it was privatized, in the 1960s? And then Freddie Mac was created by the government as a private mortgage lender to compete with the other banks, including Fannie Mae. So these are government-created banks that are given specific immunities, and they don't have the same regulations. And really, if you look at it too, people want to talk about Glass-Steagall, all this. Glass-Steagall did not cause the crash. The crash was entirely in the investment sector. You didn't see Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank. You didn't see these banks fail. They had their part in doing the mortgages, but they weren't underwriting them. It was all in the investment sector. It was in the derivatives, the securities that were sold that kept the value going up and up and up and up and up. Partly encouraged by Federal Reserve refusing to increase interest rates when the value started to increase. The Fed, if you look at the history of the Fed funds rate, it did not increase until it was way too late. They increased it, 2007? Because, they finally figured out there's a problem. It's like, who the hell's working there? It's like, they don't raise interest rates when these housing prices are starting to blow up, and that would have killed the speculation right there, or it would have allowed it to, kind of have a leak out where you could have that demand flatten out or gradually decrease and slowly put the air out of the bubble. But the Fed never did that, did it? And then you have other government policies that are encouraging people to buy homes, such as tax credits for homeowners, tax credits for married couples, tax credit, all these things for children, and all the money given to suburban neighborhoods. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes things that the government does. Says, hey, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house. This is the American dream. Buy your house with your white picket fence and pay your mortgage, and you'll be good. this is what creates all this false demand. But Kyle will never see that. Because his whole thing is, the big banks are corrupt, the boom-bust cycle. Not even knowing what it means. You want a boom-bust cycle in the economy. Granted, you don't want, I'd say, because if you look at back in the 1800s, you had boom-bust cycles that were just insane. Like, we lose half our GDP and then we gain then we gain it all back in 2 years. I don't think you want it that high. You need some kind of mechanism where, like, the government needs to be able to prevent the economy from just wrecking itself in like a year, where the economy just has to restructure. You want some restructuring, but you do have to protect workers. You do have to protect money in bank accounts. There are certain things you have to do. But the bottom line is this. You have to have an economy that makes sense, and not just whine about boom-bust cycles, big banks, Goldman Sachs, all this shit. It doesn't work. You have to view economics like you view gravity. Gravity doesn't give a shit if your 6-year-old child drops off the building, and how you're going to be distressed. Gravity does not care. The kid is going to die. Period. That's how economics works. You cannot manipulate it to be something it is not. And the more you try to manipulate it, the more ineffective you are going to have things. And that's just that. Okay, well, that's enough of that rant, so let's move on.
He called it.
Why? Because they say it doesn't make any sense. It's voodoo. Because the argument's made by the right.
Because it's voodoo.
Well, what happens is if you
It's voodoo economics because it's voodoo.
Because they say
You listen to this guy?
it doesn't make any sense. It's voodoo. Because the argument's made by the right.
Here we go. Here's the big one.
Well, what happens is if you deregulate and cut taxes for the rich,
Argument?
you're gonna somehow increase revenue to the government by cutting taxes for the rich. Wait, how does that make any sense?
He doesn't even
That's right,
understand.
it doesn't make sense. You're literally cutting tax revenue to the government, and the claim is by cutting tax revenue to the government, you're going to increase revenue to the government. That's just anti-math. But no, they say, no, you don't get it. When you cut taxes for the rich and deregulate, you unleash the beast of the capitalist system so much that there's so much wealth creation, glorious wealth creation, that even though people are paying a lower tax rate, they're paying more in
Alright,
revenue.
now this is the thing
because
that
there's so much
I came
wealth
here to
creation
debunk.
that
I
the
just
lower
wanted
tax
to do
rate
that
still
other stuff
generates more
because
revenue.
it's stuff that he
But
repeats,
we've
but
tried it,
this
and
is
it
what
doesn't
I have
work.
the stuff for. Now, here are the major tax increases. You could look at it from the tax foundation here. It has all the brackets, how they used to be set up. Here's the 1964 bracket. Here's the 1963 bracket. This is what we're going to be focusing on, because then you get all kinds of World War II stuff. So it's like, I'm going to be fair to Kyle and only include stuff after World War II, like during, what we had in the 90%. Now, let's look at everything from the 1940s on. So, now, keep in mind, this is in constant fiscal year 2009 dollars, which means this is going to account for any inflation. Now, this starts from 1940, so we can't go back to the Depression, unfortunately. But, here's what we can do. Like you see, 1940, we collected $94 billion. This is in billions, by the way, so just so you guys know. And we're looking at receipts. Outlays here is your debt, and then this is the deficit, which is just receipts minus your outlays. So, we're looking at receipts because we want to know, okay, Kyle's claim is that lower taxes do not create higher tax revenue. Is this true? And he says, quote, no, it hasn't worked. So we're going to see. Now, you got through the 1940s, you have a steady increase, but you also have your decreases every now and then, like 411 to 392. And then this is with 90 and 91% taxes, by the way. So, you have tax revenue going up and down. And then you get to here. This is 63. And then you go 64, which I'd say, if you're passing this is fiscal year 64, so that's probably, so you went from 707 to 735 when taxes went from, you know, we'll look at it here because I want to verify this for you guys. 91%, and then 1964 it went down to 77% for all filing categories. Right here, 77% in case you can't read it. So, you know, you had that, and then you had it go down to 70% the following year in 1965 because it didn't decrease tax revenue. Like, because see, if you look at former Eisenhower quotes, he wanted to reduce taxes, but he didn't have confidence in the fact that taxes would lower. And admittedly, it's counterintuitive. How do you do that? Well, there's this thing, and you guys need to look it up too. Secular talk fans especially, thing called a Laffer Curve. You know, Thomas Laffer, it's like he basically, it's more of a diagram than anything. It's a theoretical construct that is built on extremely solid logic where you have a 0% tax rate, you produce no revenue. Why do you produce revenue? Because you're not collecting taxes. So unless people are donating, there's no revenue. And then at 100%, there's also no revenue. Why is there no revenue? Because all the profits have been taken away, and therefore there can be no tax revenue because all the money that was made was taken by the government, and therefore any entity that existed would have went out of business. So therefore there could be no tax revenue. And so that's the theoretical construct behind the Laffer curve. And then basically the whole thing is like, you know, since you have 0% at both of the ends, then the ideal tax rate for revenue must be between 0% and 100%. And this has been debated by economists for years. Quite frankly, I would argue that the Laffer curve is a more complex shape than a simple diagram curve. I'd say there could be multiple humps in the Laffer curve because you have the different impacts on different businesses. So you may have like where you have one hump at 30%, one hump at 70%. Because those are basically the two figures you see. Like some like right-wing economists will argue it's closer to 30%. Left-wing will argue that it's closer to 70%. But as you're going to see, no matter what we've decreased the tax rates to, the taxes revenue's gone up. So let's go over some more. Now, you're going to see here, like 66, 67, still 70%. And this 70% is going to stay until you get to Ronald Reagan's time. We'll scroll up to it. You know, I'll stop, just make sure you guys know, yes, the tax revenue stayed the same at 70. So you got 79, and then you got 80. Then you got 81, that was nothing done. And then he lowers it to 50%, 1982. Now this is the only brief exception to the rule, I believe. Because then you get 364, 308, 211. Now this was during a pretty hard depression. But then as you see in 1984 it goes up. But I think 1984 was when, no, it didn't decrease, but you started getting even more tax revenue, and it actually started increasing substantially. 86, 87, and let's see, now 86, 87 was when, yeah, 87 was 38%, and then 88 it was 28%. So what was the impact there? 87, you went from 1402 to 1513. This is 38%, by the way. 1988, down to 28%. That's almost cutting the top marginal rate in half. 28%, which stayed for a few years. 1558, you're still increasing tax revenue. Not as much as the previous increase, but it's still increasing. 1654, 1616, and then you got 1992, and I believe 92 was a tax increase. I believe that's when Bush, no, it was 91 that Bush increased them to 31. So yeah, you have 91, tax revenue went down. I repeat, down, when George H.W. Bush raised the top rate from 28 to 31. 1654, 1990, 1660, 91, 92. Now, I do have to note that there is an exception here, because in 93, you had Clinton, who put his tax plan in. He actually raised them to 39, and then you did get tax growth. But, and this is a big but, you had the internet boom, and this is the big tech boom. This is pretty much what Clinton's economy was just an explosion of tech. So that can explain this tax increasing revenue. So okay, let's go. So you have 93, and then you have it relatively the same. You don't have any. They didn't tinker with it, and then you have they actually raised it by like 0.1% or something. But you have 2002, it was lowered slightly, and then 2003, this is the Bush tax cut era. So let's look what happens in 2003. So 2002, they lower it by a small amount. It does decrease a little bit, but then 2003 happens, and then you get explosive growth again. You get 2371, 25, and then 2663, and then this is the crash right here, 2008. So you had significant growth in tax revenue from what it was 2141, and then by 2007, you're creating more than $500 billion in increased tax revenue in those years. And that's what happened. And see, even GDP, if you look at it, was over 4% during those times. And if you look at the GDP decrease, from 2008, it only decreased by 0.1%. So for all that huge crash, actual productivity didn't go down that much. Compare that to the Great Depression, which, what was it, 20-30% reduction in GDP, something like that. So here's the point. Kyle does not know what he's talking about. He is talking out of his ass all the time, as usual. And so, this is the thing about liberals. They have to start understanding economics. If liberals understood economics and they started making economic arguments, hell, I may even vote for them. Because I don't like the Republican Party. But I can't just deny the existence of economics. Like, they act like there's no consequence to their policies. Free college and free healthcare, and then tax the rich even more, raise taxes, raise regulations, don't decrease regulations, and like, they literally act like there is no impact. Like, if you increase demand, even at the cost of supply, that's going to improve the economy. No, that's not how it works. And until you guys understand that that's not how it works, you're going to continue to lose elections. You're going to continue to lose people like me, even more than you already have. And I'm an Obama voter. I'm a John Kerry voter. You're going to keep losing people until you start making economic sense. Thanks for listening, guys. God bless.